your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Atheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright, and this week is part 2 of Rob's story. If you didn't catch last week's episode, this one won't make a lot of sense, so you want to go back and listen before you hear this one. When we left Rob last week, he'd finally made the decision to leave drugs behind for good. He'd hit rock bottom after a lifetime of addiction, abuse, and victimization. His family gave him an ultimatum. You go to rehab, or we're done with you. Rob was at the point where he was ready to try anything. His only condition? It can't be a Christian rehab.
So at this point, my sister starts researching on the computer for rehabs. Now, it's 2007. My family's not real tech savvy. And so they just run a search. And one of the things that certain organizations are really good at is bumping their positive stuff up in the algorithm for a search, right? So she finds 3 different options, and she lays them in front of me. You can choose any one of these. None of them are Christian. And so I chose one of the 3. And actually, any of the 3 would have ended up in a similar boat, just in a different state. I'd find out later. And so my dad, the last trip, actually the only trip in my life that I ever took with just my father. And he was scared I wouldn't make out to California on my own. So he flew with me because there was a transfer in the middle of it. So he knew he couldn't just put me on the plane. So he flew with me out to California and handed me over to this guy covered in tattoos. And he left his baby. I'm the baby by 8 years. I will always be his little girl. When he passed away, I was still identifying as female at that time. Actually, it was gender fluid, but to him, I hadn't come out.
Right.
And I went to Narconon.
And where was this?
The main center was in Watsonville, California, for this one. There's centers all over. Now, I will say that they knew the right things to say to my siblings, but they also emphasized the fact of, if you hesitate on this and this person dies, you'll blame yourself for the rest of your life. They
put that shit on your family?
Well, yeah.
God.
You've got it has to happen now. We have to get the money down. They lock down the deal. They get it down. Now, I will say, I'm going to be very honest about my feelings and about the things that happened there.
Please do.
But I will say that the people that I met there honestly thought they were saving lives. So in the middle of all this chaos, I do want to say that there are good hearts.
And tell me where you're at through this. Are you, I imagine excited, scared, hopeful, all of that.
Honestly, I'm just starting to withdraw at this point.
So that's the only thing on your mind.
Well, yeah, and I don't even know that it was on my mind. It was cold sweats and they had me under lock and key until they got me out there. So unlike other people, some people get a couple fixes before they go out there and show up there and then start withdrawing there. I was already starting to go through the process of the cold sweats and the nausea and everything else.
And so there wasn't really room in your mind for any other.
My mind wasn't doing anything except for the fact of this has cost my parents $30,000, and there's no way I can ever repay that. And the other thing was I could see the sadness in my father's eyes, and know that I caused that. That broke my heart in a way that I don't think my mind could go anywhere else when it came to that. Because when you see somebody that you're used to wearing a colonel's outfit in full uniform that people stand and salute every time he walks in a room, and you see him on the verge of tears, you've not only broken his heart, but you've broken your mother's heart. I just didn't have the words. And so this guy picks me up and drives me in the middle of nowhere, and drove curvy roads back and forth. And we get to what's called the withdrawal cabin. They don't let you be around the big group of people until you go through a certain part of the process. And so I'm up there in the withdrawal cabin, and You do stuff like take obscene amounts of vitamins. You drink CalMag, which is a drink that's calcium, magnesium. Um, you just try and get food in your body, get to the point where you can walk. And they do these little sessions to try and extrovert you and get you out of your head, which is weird. It's all weird. But I'm sitting there going, I don't know it works, so whatever. Weird is what it is. I will say that one thing that worked for me was all of a sudden I had a social script.
What do you mean?
I knew that they wanted to answer this question. I knew what I was supposed to do at every point of the day. I knew what my job was to get to the next level. I suddenly had a script on how to social in this setting.
Okay, so you had a structure.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
With very specific guidelines. Now I was kind of miserable in the withdrawal cabin, but I knew that if I could graduate this level, that I could go down and there would be actual people, and actual people that were coming off drugs. So I wouldn't be like alone in the fact of I was a douchebag. So I did what I did, and I tried to manipulate. One of the things that happens when you're around a bunch of people that manipulate for a living is that manipulation doesn't necessarily work.
What would you try to do to manipulate?
I tried to give them whatever answer I thought they wanted.
Gotcha.
To be able to pass the session. Later I would learn it's called auditing. But everything I would say wouldn't end whatever the exercise was. And sometimes the exercises would last for an hour and 45 minutes. You wouldn't know how long it was going to be. And you start practice being able to sit there comfortably and sit across from a person that's 3 feet in front of you and just not fidget. And for somebody that had fidgeted their whole life, being still is hard. But then it got about a week into my process there. And you're not allowed to contact anybody at home through this process.
Why is that?
I can tell you why they told me and what I bought. That when you're coming down and when you're detoxing, you're most vulnerable to want to leave, and they call it a blow. And so they want a buffer period before you're allowed to contact home because everything is miserable during that time. When I would come on staff later, you don't want them giving negative PR to the family and talking about how weird it is so people research more until they get past a certain point. But they thought it was protecting me from running away, from confronting myself.
Which I'm sure made sense at the time.
It completely made sense. And I know for a fact that the people that worked the withdrawal cabin believed that with their whole heart because they weren't going to let me escape in any way, shape, or form. They call it intention without reservation. And whether you have to do that through sheer tone and the way you demand it and being persistent, or whether you have to do that through physical force, we're going to do what we're going to do, and this is the next thing you're going to do, so you might as well deal with it. But I'd been there for about a week, and then I woke up one morning, and I could smell again. It was the weirdest thing. And I look out my window, and there is sage and lavender growing, and there is a hummingbird. And it was the first time that I felt my head be clear. My body still felt like crap, but my senses were coming back. And so...
Tell me about that moment. Talk me through that.
I don't think... There was one other time I remember having a moment like that, and I was completely tripping balls, and we had gone to watch Morning Glories open. And if you've ever sat and watched the entire process of Morning Glories open and close in the morning, it's a unique experience. Imagine that on hallucinogenics. It's a completely unique experience.
Yeah.
But this was the first time that I had a euphoric feeling that wasn't drug-induced.
In your life?
That I can remember.
Okay.
At that point. The smell of sage and lavender to this day brings me back to a moment of, okay, it's time. And that was the only thought. My head wasn't all over the place. It wasn't anything. I was just kind of taking in what was around me. And the hair stood up on the back of my neck. And I'm like, okay, what's next? And it was this weird moment of clarity. And so I decided I was going to put my whole heart into it. No matter how weird it got, no matter what it was. I had heard that this company also sometimes offers graduates of the program a job. And since I was coming from a place where I didn't have a place to live, I didn't have any viable skills because an English degree you can't do much with. I was like, I might be able to have a future. And so I would go down the hill and be able to meet the rest of the people. And part of what they do is they assign you a twin to go through this process with. And there's 8 different books you have to complete, and each book has a set of objectives that you have to complete. And the first part is you just being able to sit there comfortably, and then you confront people for some amount of time. And you practice this for days on end, just being able to sit 3 feet in front of a person with your feet on the ground, your hands on your lap, and you start with your eyes closed because you have to be in their presence. And in order to move on to the next thing, you have to get an hour-long pass.
So you have to do that for an hour?
For an hour.
Like sit there?
Like you have to practice it, work your way up. You start by getting a 5-minute pass, and then you get a 10-minute pass, and then you get a 15-minute pass. Now, if your face turns red, if your shoulder moves, if it looks like you have a tone drop in your emotion, like if you look like you're frustrated or you purse your lips, it's a flunk.
Jesus, that's a lot of pressure.
That's a lot of pressure. And you have to be there comfortably. The objective is not to survive it. They'll flunk you if you don't look like you're comfortable. And most of the time you're not comfortable because you're withdrawing from drugs still. Like you can say that you're done withdrawing after a week, but your body hasn't had nutrition for years. And so we did that. And then the next thing is to go for your pass with your eyes open. And looking at somebody if your eyes water too much, if you blink too much, and being able to confront somebody that close to you. When I don't know that I've ever looked somebody in the eyes at that point.
What does it mean to confront somebody?
To face. That's their technical.
Literally just face somebody and just look at somebody.
Sit like this and you'd sit like that and we'd be there for hours, passing or flunking, and you can't get frustrated at your twin. And the person you're sitting across from is your twin. And you go through this series of exercise, and they're called
they're going through the same thing.
Exactly the
withdrawal
same thing.
And
yeah, everything. And then you do a sauna program. Now, later on, you're going to have to do these training routines to a higher gradient. And I know I'm going to throw in terminology, so if there's terms you don't understand, let me know. Yeah. Because one of the things that does happen here is you adopt this whole new vocabulary that, whether intentional or not by the staff there, creates this barrier between you and the outside world. Because I noticed once I could talk to my family, I had to pick my words so careful, and none of them were words that I was used to using anymore. My ability to communicate with them, although I couldn't communicate what I was actually feeling because I didn't have the vocabulary and outside world words to say to my parent, like things like havingness or...
give me an example of that.
Let's see, going exterior would be like you feeling like you're looking upon your body instead of being in your body, or TR0 confront would have to do with an exercise of being able to sit there in front, or intention without reservation exercise would be you yelling at an ashtray for hours trying to make the ashtray stand up with your pure intention.
Wait. Okay. Talk me through that.
Okay. TR8, when you get to the upper training routines, which you have to pass all the confront ones, and you have to, the lower ones have to do with communication, your ability to face, your ability to receive answers and give answers, and your ability to not go on to the next statement until you get an answer to what you're going through. So,
and what do you mean by that? I mean, is that just like basic communication, or
their equation for communication is to, let me see if I can come up with the exact words. I don't know. To go from origin to receipt point with duplicated understanding at the receipt point, the intention at the initiation point. That's not their exact words, but it's pretty close.
And now in English.
It means we took a book called Alice in Wonderland and we would read lines from it and the other person would practice acknowledgments. So I would be like, the Cheshire Cat said this. And you'd be like, cool. And you would practice acknowledgments that are full stops for TR2. So cool, awesome, that are meant to stop that line of communication. Then TR2.5 would practice acknowledgments that would continue conversation. Really? And so you practice and you break down every piece of it. TR3 has to do with being able to get an answer to your question when they're trying to go on. One of the things that happens is the third TR0 is called bull bait, in which they try and find all your buttons. And by buttons, I mean all your triggers, and flatten them. And so I'm in the first grading of it, so it wasn't as tough. It was just annoyingness. And
Flattening them, I mean...
they press it until you quit reacting, and you can be in tone cheerful across from it and receiving whatever is across from you.
Wow.
And so part of the point of this is to stop the reaction that's part of you and to make it to where you act consciously rather than react.
Okay, and there's a certain logic to that?
There is. Like, there's just enough logic for it to be annoying. It was just enough logic for me to be like, these people are weird, but they're, it's better than sitting around and talking about drugs all the time. I had not heard drugs mentioned once at this point in my entire thing.
So that's got to feel pretty healthy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm like, we're not talking about drugs. I'm not in a room with a bunch of people smoking cigarettes talking about drugs. I'm on the side of a mountain in California, with chefs on staff that, like eating food, like there were parts of it that felt really, really good. Now, the next thing that we had to do when the upper TRs, you talked about intention with reservation. So it had to do with TR 6 and 7 has to do with physically manifesting your intention by forcing a person to walk between walls. You look at that wall. Thank you. You walk over to that wall. Thank you. Turn around. Thank you. And or you touch that wall. Thank you. Turn around. And so you would be between two walls that are about 8 feet apart, and you'd have them look at that wall. You'd acknowledge them. You'd have them
literally just acknowledge it. Okay, I see that you've done the thing that I asked you to do.
Yeah, you say a full stop acknowledgement. So awesome, cool, and then
so that's an acknowledgement that doesn't invite further conversation.
Yeah,
got it. Okay.
And we're ready to move on to the next step. And so you walk over to that wall. Awesome. You touch that wall. Cool. Turn around. And so you do this back and forth until the course supervisor would give you a pass. Now, if they didn't comply in one of the exercise, you had to physically force them to. So you're training yourself to manifest your intention no matter how the other person feels. TR8, what they do is rather than a person, they give you an ashtray and put it in the chair. And you go through this process of put your intention into the ashtray. Now imagine the ashtray, getting the thought of the ashtray being an ashtray. Like these weird commands. And so basically you have to learn that your intention is not your voice. Because you start out by yelling at the ashtray. Stand up. Thank you. Sit down on that chair. Thank you.
And would you would be physically moving it?
Yeah, afterwards. And there was this whole thing where you had to give the command, it had to move, you had to acknowledge it. And the words had to be exactly the same, and you would do it. And the first level of it is as loud as you can. And the next one is normal voice. And the next one is quiet. And then the next one is with just pure intention, not even thinking the thought. And so it talks about, it has to do with removing words as being the only thing you have in intention. And it was weird, but I got to yell. And so it was one of those things that for somebody that didn't feel like they had a voice for so long, being able to realize how much space my voice could take up was good for me in some way.
Yeah, I imagine it made you feel powerful.
Yeah,
probably for the first time, or if not the first time,
and the fact that I could make noise, and the other thing, and it was an ashtray at this point, that the other thing had a choice whether or not to comply, but I could make it comply if I wanted. There was a sense of power for the first time in my life, and I don't think it was a healthy power.
But of course, you probably weren't super equipped to tell the difference.
No, not at all,
right?
not at all. And I started to embrace their definition of control, which was the ability to start, change, and stop. And so there were times when my head would get so overwhelmed that my next thought, even to this day, is start, change, stop. What is the start? What do I have to do to change? How do I stop? And that is how I control things in my life, at least at that point. And even today sometimes, especially after my father passed, there were days that it was just start, change, stop, start, change, stop. Every step was that, sitting up in the bed was that, So it's one of those things I've got to start my body. And some people stall on the starting. Some people stall on the stopping. Some people don't like change. But there was this hypnotic rhythm of start, change, stop that would start to play in my head.
Give me a specific example of that, of you working yourself through that process.
My dad's chair used to look out at the backyard. And he would sit there and talk about all the things he needs to get done for Mom. And I was sitting in his recliner after he had passed, and my mom and them were dealing with some funeral arrangements. And I looked out and saw that it needed raked. And I heard my dad's voice in my head, saying, I need to get that done for Mom. because he lived for my mother, especially toward the end. And so I remember taking the rake in my hand and go, okay, Robin, start. And I would move it, I'd think change. And then when I stop moving, I would think stop.
And so it's literally just talking yourself through that motion. So
So
start is you literally beginning the motion, and change is the motion itself.
And stop is when you start.
Okay.
And that would echo over and over and over again in my head.
Gosh, and I can see how powerful that is.
Yeah, when I had nothing, and that's like all you have to do is take the next step. That was my take the next step, echo in my head. And so, at this point, at the very beginning of the program, that was powerful for me. And all of a sudden, I had some type of control over my body for the first time in my life. Their philosophy is not that you're powerless, like some other programs.
Right, like an ANA.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that you can make better choices in your future, but once an addict doesn't mean always an addict.
I'm sure that was probably
also
good to
empowering.
hear. Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't a higher power, it was on me. Like I had to make these choices to start, change, and stop in order to change my life. And I had the power to do that, and it was my responsibility to do that. Because there was no hero coming to save me. And for a long time, I'd cling to Christ and cling to God because I just wanted I just wanted a man to love me in a way that I felt like I was worth something. And the only person or thing that I thought had the power to do that was something divine because I was that low.
And here you were being told for the first time in your life that, no, you can take control of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Jesus, I can feel like viscerally, I can
Yeah.
feel how powerful that is.
Yeah, and you're on the side of a mountain and you're yelling and you have control and you're doing this. And then the next thing is a sauna program. And you're in a sauna for 5 hours a day, not continually, but you do exercise for 30 minutes, you take a bunch of niacin, it's supposed to flush out all these bacteria, you take a bunch of vitamins, you go in for 15 minutes, you take a shower, you go in for 15 minutes, you take a cold shower, you go in for 15 minutes, and you do this for 5 hour a day to sweat out all this stuff. And by the end of this process, my skin's less oily, and I had really bad acne, and you add to that meth, you add to that skin picking that's still part of my issues. Like I ended up with scars like across my face and stuff like that, and for the first time, I didn't have a face that I was scared to look at in the mirror. Now, until this point, it had probably been 12 years since I had looked into a full body mirror. And probably I had only looked into a mirror this high up when I was doing makeup for a special
Chest
occasion.
high?
Yeah. Above my breast and above,
Yeah.
and that would be true for a while. But this is the first time I was able to look in a mirror and not. The guy that raped me had scars all over his face. So when I saw those scars on my face, there was this internal, like, you're becoming him.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah, like
Wow.
when it comes to, when I unpackage some of that not facing the fact of my maleness, like, I physically had an image of my face becoming his face. I had nightmares of that over and over and over again. And the scar tissue that was on my face. Now, it ended up healing, but that would be the only thing that would stop me from picking. And very rarely would that idea come to my mind. Like, it would be subconscious that I was doing it, and then I'd be like, you're going to become him. And I would put my hand down at that point. And so that would play over and over and over again in my head. And so the first time I looked in the mirror and I had clear skin. And I couldn't see my hip bones anymore. Like at that point, using crack, I was smaller than my muscle had wasted away and doing that type of thing. So I saw the gains and I had another win. They call anytime you reach some type of realization, they call it a win. So I had a win. And then it was time to go back into the learning to study course. And you have to learn all this technology for how to study. So every time you do something, it means you have a certain block to studying. So if you fidget, it means you have a misunderstood word. And so somebody goes through every word of the text until they can find what words you don't fully understand. And by fully understand, I mean able to recite every definition of the word and use them in a sentence. And so think about going through 8 books doing this, but the word it had something like 18 definitions at that time. And so they could always find a word. So there was no way for me to logically come up with the fact of I'm not fidgeting because I have a misunderstood word. I'm fidgeting because I have an anxiety disorder and I'm coming off crack. In their minds, I had sweated out all the toxins in the sauna. That was their science, quote unquote. And so you should be toxin free at this point, and it's time to move on. But they wanted you to do this before you went back into the training routine so you would have a better understanding of the words and start applying them to the upper books. And so I finally make it through this book, and you have to clay demo things that you struggle with. And by clay demo, I mean, like, say there was a concept of every time you fidget, you have a misunderstood word. So I would have to make a mass and label it, make a mass and label it, make a mass and label it, that had to do with every part of
What's
that.
a mass?
A mass of clay. So like,
Literally a mass of clay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would literally take
clay
this
demo
hard.
is not a metaphor.
Yeah, no, it's not
Okay.
at all. It's a very physical, like, and there was one point where I did a 72-piece clay demo and it took forever and did all that stuff. And you have to do scenes with arrows, and you have to do it in a certain order. If you make a mass, you have to label that mass right then, and it could be like a one word. So if this lump was a person, I could put person. I couldn't add significance by putting the name of the person, and then I'd make a book and I'd label it book, and then I'd
And so you're literally like building a person out
of clay every time. And so you build a mass, you add the significance with the label. You build a mass, you add significance with the label.
And this is you're doing this.
You're doing this.
These are the blocks that you have. So if your block is like
There's 3 blocks. Okay. Absence of mass is one of the blocks, which is why you would do a clay demo, because you're adding mass to the concept to prove that you understand it. Okay. So exactly that face. So it's one of those things that I'm trying to think. What's a concept? Say love. No, love's too elaborate. How about havingness? Havingness, for their definition, this is very simplified, and they really hate verbal data. So if anybody contacts you about that, they would probably complain that I'm giving you verbal data. But havingness has to do with your ability to exercise control over things in the environment. And say that you don't get what that definition is. Like, you know the words, but it's not sinking in what that is. So I might create a man and label it a man, or a person, excuse me, and label it person, and then have a box, and then do a thought bubble in which there was a box with a no symbol through it, because he doesn't realize that he can have that box. And then I might do another scene where he looks at the box and that no symbol comes off, and then I'd have another scene where he would go embrace the box. So I'd understand the concept that he could exercise having the things in his environment and controlling things in the environment. And so it's one of those things that the supervisor has to see the concept in whatever you clay demo if they caught you manifesting one of the things for absence of mass. So say you're sitting in a classroom and you start leaning on your hand. So, and I'm trying to remember, sort of dead, sort of spinning, bored, exasperated is one of the lists. You had to regurgitate and recite all these pages of books of the different things that would be manifestations of it. They see the course supervisor's job is to spot the manifestations and then enforce the solution.
And so the manifestation is the
fidgeting or you're
okay.
angry.
Yeah.
So if you're angry, you've got a misunderstood word. So it's their job to help you find the word if you can't find the word. Or if you have an absent mass. The other thing is too steep of gradient. That means you've gone too far and you've gone past something you can't understand, so they have to put you back on your check sheet. Every course has a check sheet, and you have to mark off everything. And at any point, they can make you go back. They're just trying to make sure you understand it fully in your own understanding so you can come at to it with an open mind. Now, in hindsight, that is very ironic to me. But they're making sure you get the concept how they want you to get the concept. But I also was the kid that shook the entire church pew every time we sat in a church thing with bouncing. You'll notice now that I'm fidgety, but my legs aren't bouncing. Like, that has been conditioned out of me for the most part.
Because that's a manifestation.
Yeah, it's a manifestation.
This whole process.
It was also a flunk for TR0s. And so as uncomfortable as it was for me until I don't even know how I ever got comfortable, or if I ever faked it, or what it was. I suppress how my body wants to be a lot. most of my energy
override your natural instincts.
Yeah. Most of my energy is spent trying to control myself based on ideas that have been ingrained in me that I'm not even aware that I have.
I mean, it's classic conditioning.
Yeah.
Right? It's been
Absolutely.
conditioned out of you. Or
Absolutely.
conditioned into you, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah. And of course, my mom and dad come to visit at this point and stuff like that, and they realize I can sit still. And so I think in their head, all those things were drug related.
So that's positive progress.
Yeah.
In their mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
God,
Yeah.
that's insidious.
Yeah. And so, and at this point, I'm having wins, and every Friday night we get together, and people that finish a course are acknowledged, and you get to share your wins, and there's community going on, and so, and there's people that understand the words I'm saying, and I'm forced to communicate, and they're actually listening, or at least waiting to acknowledge. And then I get twinned with a person for what's going to be the upper levels. And there's this rule at rehabs that bars people from having sexual activity. That's important to know for the next phase of this. There's also a rule within the technology, and technology is their dogma. That's what they refer to it as. That when you're with a twin, you guys are responsible for each other. Now, you add to that the fact that I'm completely oblivious to a lot of things that are going on. I'm not exactly the one the girls confide in when they're doing things that are what they call out ethics. And out ethics means that you're doing something that's a violation of something. Now, you don't get to pick your twin. And I'm assigned this twin. Actually, I was turned down by 2 other twins before that, which didn't do my ego real well.
Okay, so you don't get to pick them, but if one is chosen for you, you can turn them down?
These people did, and I think what happened is they balked so much about it that in order to get them to continue on, they kind of caved.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I'm
So
guessing
you just threw a
that
fit.
well, and I'm guessing that the people that did cave probably had to go and do re-education because they lost their TRs.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's one of those things that's not supposed to happen. Now, however, some of those people that turned me down and got the twins they wanted are now married and have happy families and are completely sober and doing awesome. I didn't understand that they had a romantic connection to somebody else. I saw it as me not being worthy to be their twin when they went to somebody and complained that much. I was oblivious to that. But I'd come to find out that my twin, and I didn't realize this, we got called into ethics, which is a department that is supposed to enforce you being a healthy member of the group. And you can't take in data or new knowledge if you are out ethics. So
you're not allowed to learn new things if you're not
you're
following
pulled
the
off
rules.
course. Yeah. You're pulled off course, and you have to do a couple things in order to get back on course. You have to write up your overts and withholds, which is you writing time, place, form, and event for everything you've done wrong, or everything they would think you had done wrong.
You're writing out confessions.
Yeah, basically. And you have to repair what's called repairing your conditions. And we didn't understand the terminology at that point because we hadn't got to that book yet. But you're in a condition of liability or treason, and you have to do these steps to earn your way back into the group. And the group has to choose to let you back in. So until you do all these things, you can't go back to studying. Now remember this, I mean, I haven't said this program has no time limit. You do it till you're done. And that was one of the things that my family thought was good, and the fact of she can't go in for 28 days in their head at this point and just walk out. I had to earn it. So we get put on ethics, and they separate us and they interrogate us to try and find out what's going on. My twin barely talked to me unless we were in course. Like, we were roommates, but different circles all together. You know, I was hanging out with the emo kids, you know, listening, playing guitar and playing drum over here, and she was definitely not. It turns out that she had been sucking dicks for cigarettes down by the dumpster, which is illegal. And so in my head, because it's illegal, I understood why it couldn't happen. It's also out ethics on one of your dynamics of life. They call every area of life a dynamic, and those are spelled out for you. And anything having to do with sex or relationships or family is your second dynamic. And so she had been out ethics on her second dynamic, which I was completely oblivious to, but they also interrogated me to the point because they weren't sure I had been oblivious to. So I have to work until she's willing to get all her withholds off. And we would do stuff like break rocks. And at this point, I'm like, I just want to get her through it. Like she needs my support. We need this. Because I knew I didn't have any knowledge of this stuff. And whether you believe it or not, I knew I had said what I knew. Because at the first time in my life, I knew that this was not my fault. However, I'll support my twin. I'll go through it. I'll work. I'm trying to get a job here eventually. I want to be the star pupil, like egocentric, but also whatever,
I mean, it makes sense given where you're at.
And there was a point where we're breaking rocks. I don't know if you've seen the movie Bent or read the book Bent. It's about homosexuals in the Holocaust and the arbitrary things they had them do of moving rocks from one side to the other without there being a purpose. And once they piled them all over there, they moved it to the other. And having no human contact. One of the other things that happens when you're on ethics is other people aren't allowed to talk to you. And so you're doing this manual labor, but I didn't see that it was going to be used for anything. So when we were breaking rocks and moving rocks, my head would go back to this emotional movie I had seen about gay people not being able to communicate with each other and being denied this and doing this arbitrary thing. So it was the first time that I felt
so breaking rocks isn't a metaphor. You were literally like breaking rocks.
Some people had mini sledgehammers. Some people had weights that had broken in half and were breaking rocks, and we were all up and down the side of the road. The next thing that we had to do was scrub a dumpster. And I remember kneeling in the dumpster and scrubbing it with a toothbrush, and she's fighting this the whole time, like saying that she hasn't done anything, and at this point I know, but I'm also not going to narc.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that was me being out ethics to them, like me not doing what's best for her survival by getting honest and writing this knowledge report. Anytime you see somebody do anything, you're supposed to write a knowledge report that had time, place, form, and event of what they did in order to help their survival. And so she finally gets honest and does this thing. And so we end up going into the room where we're supposed to write our OWs up.
OW?
Overts and withholds. Sorry, that's the short version of the confessional, the handwriting.
Gotcha, okay.
And you're not allowed to be subjective, and it has to be very precisely time, place, form, event, or they make you go back and rewrite it.
And time, place, form, and event
is literally
like the time it happened.
It was Tuesday at 3:30 in the afternoon. I was by the dumpster. To my left was this. I got down on my knees. I sucked his dick. He gave me a cigarette. There can be no justifiers, no time, place, form, event.
Got it. Okay.
To where what they're trying to do is they're trying to call up the mental image of that event and release the charge of negativity that's attached to it.
Okay.
But they take us into this room, and by room I mean a tent that has a wooden structure and a couple of wooden pylons, and we have to sit there until we're willing to say everything. And I had written what I could. I didn't know what else I could do. But then I look, and there's these wooden posts in the middle of the room. And the last time I'd been in a setting like that was when I was raped. And so I break down in the middle of it and have a full-fledged panic attack. And I'm like, I will write whatever you want me to write. Just can I do it anywhere else? And they saw this as a turn on, like something that needed to be addressed.
And which they're not wrong, but I bet it's not going to be a healthy way of doing it.
No, not at all. And part of it was I was one of those people that I was going to leave. I was going to leave unless there was another solution, because I couldn't physically be in that room anymore. Like, that's where my head was at that point. And so they ended up caving and sending me to one of their smaller facilities, which meant I'd have a different twin, which meant I'd do things. And so I go through the rest of the program, and I write up my overts and withholds. So I wrote up hundreds of things I did wrong on each dynamic. But I need to discuss their definition of responsibility. You are full source and cause for all efforts and all counter efforts on all of your dynamics. Anything that's happened in your life started with you. So when I get to that second dynamic and everything that's an overt or withhold having to do with sex, I have to own how every time I've been raped or assaulted was my fault.
Jesus.
and I have to write it and put it on paper, and then I have to sit there while somebody reads it in front of me until I am cheerful at the end of the process. Yeah. And so the first dynamic is your mind and your body. Second dynamic is your family and sex. Third dynamic is every group you've ever been a part of. Fourth dynamic is all of humanity. And fifth dynamic has to do with matter, energy. Well, fifth dynamic has to do with life forms. I'm getting them out of order.
Yeah.
Disclaimer, I'm not real up on six.
So many angry emails.
Yeah, yeah. They'll probably just disown you. That's okay. But you go on up until the point where you have eternity as one of the later ones. And so writing up my overts against God. And I get to the point where I write up my birth. And I eventually finished this course. They were satisfied with the things I had written up. And then I go into repairing my past ethics, and I finish out. I graduate, whatever, and they offer me a chance to train there. Now, they also, in the book After the Overts and Withholds, they go through, you can be on different conditions in every area of your life. And I realized that I had committed so many crimes, their term, against my family that I had out ethics with my family, which is a true statement. The words are weird,
Right.
But I had been not healthy for my family. There's also something that they call a PTS condition, which is a potential trouble source. That all illness and foul ups in your life is caused by a PTS condition, which means you're connected to a potential trouble source. While I was there, my mom had breast cancer, and my dad had a heart condition. And so I earnestly believed that I was the potential trouble source in my family's life. And I earnestly believed that I had to stay away, and that was the kindest thing I could do to my family. And so the only lifeline I really had for a place to live, and I knew I wouldn't survive on the street. I knew I would go back to what was natural, which wasn't a person I wanted to be anymore. So for $50 a week, you could get room and board, work for 100 hours, and they would train you up and give you a job skill that could be applied there. And after 3 months, if you had survived that, then you could get minimum wage. If you stayed in upper ethics conditions, not out ethics, you could get bonuses. Now, if you were out ethics, you would be in lower conditions, you would be re-educated, and all this different stuff, and you would lose your bonuses, and people wouldn't talk to you. So it was run very similar, but I knew the words, and I knew the training, and I knew that I could complete coursework. And so I began this period of basically what was running on fumes, and most people see it as indentured servitude. I saw it as nobody else would give me a place to stay, 3 squares a day, and $50. And I was looked at by these people that would come in the program. They're like, you don't know what I'm going through. Because they saw the staff and assumed that everybody was professionals, and didn't realize, it was openly said that a lot of us had gone through the program before, but they didn't buy that. They looked at us, they saw healthy skin, they saw healthy clothes, they saw professionalism, they saw us being very militant in a kind way, and they assumed that we were never like them. And so that was a surreal moment for me, like the fact of these people may not like me, but they respect me as a professional.
Which that's not anything you'd ever had before, right?
Never. The thought of being able to make a living doing something, it had never crossed my mind. Like, I never expected to live past 27. Never. And that's when I went there. Actually, it was right before I turned 27. And so I get done with my training, and I start out as a withdrawal specialist up in the withdrawal cabin. And so I spent a few months, getting puked on and, dealing with the sauna things. And people that were coming down off PCP might punch you a few times, and dealing with that, but still getting them to the next part. And I earnestly believed that I was saving their life. And I knew the person next to me believed that. Now, part of it was the desperation of the fact that I didn't have anywhere else to go. So I clinged to that belief. But I also didn't have access to technology, or even if I did, I didn't have time. By the time I could sleep, I had like 5 minutes, and I couldn't afford a phone that was a smartphone at that point, and none of the houses could have internet because people could hack the internet and use it to order drugs or blow, which is escape, different stuff like that. So in my mind, that all made sense. I didn't get the isolationist side of that at that point. And then about a year or so into the process of working there, somebody looked at me and goes, there's this thing we've got for professional development, for personal development. And the fact of, if you go and take these courses, they were extension courses, you get so many cents per hour raise. And at this point, I'm making minimum wage, and each course I do, I get extra thing. But this is when I realized that they use the Scientology technology. Now, they're not technically owned by Scientology, but all the technology is based on Scientology, and a lot of the upper echelon staff are Scientologists.
How did you figure that out? Like, what was the point in time where you made that connection?
Well, no, I got the first course. The first course was Programs at Work, and it was Bridge Publications, and it was done by the Church of Scientology. And so there was never really a conversation about it, but I didn't know anything about Scientology. I had never heard the word before this moment. And
how long from entering the program to this point?
I guess it was probably a year and a half,
okay,
something like that, and in which I had been away from anything that was going on. And most people hear about Scientology because things like Anonymous happened and stuff like that, and that started after I went. None of that had happened. And so I start taking these courses, and then I start to read Dianetics, and I'm in the lunch line, and I looked at one of my coworkers, one of the other trainees, or I wasn't a trainee at this point. At this point, I was full-time staff. And I said something, I'm reading this really cool book called Dianetics. And all of a sudden, 3 executives surround me and start yelling at me. And I have absolutely no idea what I've done. And it's because I said a word.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I got this pit in my stomach. That I'm like, if this is really going to help people, if this is really going to heal people, why are we hiding it? But I would never say that out loud.
Well, and when they were yelling at you, what was the stuff that they were saying?
What are you doing? Do you want? And they would yell things about verbal data. Because I had said a word that somebody could get a misunderstood word, and one of the manifestations of a misunderstood word is you blow. So I could be causing this person to go out again and use and die.
And again, blowing is escaping.
Is leaving, is a sudden leave.
So to put this together, you use the word Dianetics, which is tied to Scientology, which could have a negative connotation, which could make people leave.
Yeah.
And that's what they were pissed about.
Well, they were upset because I had given verbal data. Now, once I got further along, I understood that there had been what they call black PR out there, negative press on it, and that word could be a trigger for people too. So there was that level of it, but I hadn't reached that level of knowledge. So at this point, I get sent for re-education.
Because you said the word Dianetics.
Yes. Because I was trying to share something that had helped me.
Gosh, that sends a healthy message.
Yeah. And so you have to go through all these policies that are written by somebody. And so I learned basically you don't say a word about what you're reading to anyone else. I finished 18 courses that first year. Which each one came with a raise. And then it came to the point where they said, so many people have to have state training. So they sent me to get state training because I volunteer distribute type thing. Yeah. And the stuff that was being said in training on how to be a resident addiction specialist, which I got my certification, didn't make any sense and wasn't meshing with what we were doing there. And some of the stuff we were doing there really canceled, wasn't good based on what I was learning. So all of a sudden I had conflicting data. And so I wanted to know more, but I didn't have internet. So I got on a bus on my day off. I had 10 hours off a week. And that's because I was the house mom at that point. And I went to another town, and I went into a computer cafe, and I looked up Scientology. And that's when I found stuff about Anonymous. That same week that I did that, my best friend, when I came back to the house, was gone. They wouldn't tell me where she was gone. They just said that she was out 2D with somebody and she had been fired. And I was no longer allowed to talk to her. Out 2D, that second dynamic, she had had sex with somebody or flirted with somebody.
Gotcha.
And as a
second dynamic.
Yeah.
So there was a problem with her second dynamic. Got
She was a trainee and she had had feelings and flirted with somebody who was a full-time staff, which was against the rules for your first year. And so she had been, all of her stuff had been removed and we were no longer allowed to talk to her ever.
But you didn't know any of the details.
I didn't know any of the
She
details.
was out 2D and like that was the only
Yeah,
explanation.
and they issue what's called a goldenrod, and you're never allowed to talk to that person again. You're not allowed to contact them on. And so the one person that had been through all this with me was gone. Now, it suddenly hit me that if I said anything wrong, that I could just be gone. And so I had a lot of these questions. I had a lot of these wondering things. But the other thing that had started to happen is that I started to realize that a lot of people didn't have contact with their family. And I know that if I had said something to my parents or I had said anything, my mom doesn't really like the Scientology thing, that I would be encouraged to disconnect because my family would be labeled my PTS. And of course, at the same time, I found out I was diabetic and I had sleep apnea. So they were looking for the potential trouble source in my life.
Of course. So it was, there's probably some paranoia happening
A
there.
whole lot of paranoia.
Yeah.
And what I thought was irrational paranoia at the time, but I'm not so sure now. We went through a phase in which 2 or 3 of people that I had known in the program, I'd find out they had died at the morning meeting, and then I would have to go out and be cheerful for the rest of the day. So basically, I'd come in for the day, found out somebody had died, and then I'd have to go take care of the people. And so it pushed me to try and help these other people because I was so scared they would go back out there and die. So I had this conflicted thing of something's not right here, but I'm not using it right now, and I'm not dead right now.
So like on balance, there's something positive happening, right? Like there's got to be.
Yeah, I'm not dead. I mean, and that was my standard. Like
the
fact that I'm breathing was my standard for life at that point. But I was also making an income. I was also respected. I also had a wardrobe. I could buy things. And I didn't know anyone for that. We went through that process, and then something started to happen. I had to get a call from my boss saying, I need you to disconnect the cable. Okay. Which, I don't question orders. I did my orders, and I did that. And then I would come to find out that at another center, 2 or 3 people had died. And they didn't want people to see it in the news because, so at this point, people were dying even at Narcanons. Then in about 2012, I had my great niece was born. And she has Rubinstein-Tybee syndrome, which is a very rare genetic disorder. She had to have her legs broken, pins put in at 6 months, and couldn't talk. She's going to be short. She's had some things were formed different. And both of our parents were in the National Guard and had a chance to deploy and earn enough money to help with medical treatment. And so my mom reaches out to me and goes, we kind of need help. Is there any way you can help us out? So in my mind, first time my family had invited me to come be back. And based on the condition work, you had to be invited back into the group. And I never expected that to happen.
Gotcha. And so that was the parallel, right? Because if you're on the outs with the recovery group, you have to work until they invite you back in.
Uh-huh.
And so you were on the outs with your family.
And then all of a sudden
they were.
And so
they invited you back in.
They invited me back in.
Wow.
And so all of a sudden I kind of saw my out. I saw a way for me to be part of my family again, and to contribute something to my family. But I also found a way to explain to this organization why I had to leave, which isn't very easy to do.
Right. So because you had those uneasy feelings and you were like, gosh, something's not right here. I don't know if I like this. But if you just up and left, then it's all over.
Then nobody's allowed to talk to me ever again.
Right. But now you have an excuse.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you're still put in a lower condition. You still have to work your way up to being friends of the group rather than a group. But of course, I was isolated, wasn't allowed to come to meetings. I mean, people could talk to me. I wasn't put on ethics, but I had to do the condition work. Now, then I get a call from the boss from one of the other centers going, why is it taking you so long to do this process? We just wanted you to go through it so you left on good terms. Whereas the person that was at my facility was kind of begrudging because he had to find a new person to take care of the women, to drive the thing.
Yeah.
And so hadn't communicated that to me in the fact it was supposed to. So, of course, I'm doing star student type stuff of there's no way they can deny it. At the same time, I didn't realize that he was also kind of dealing with some ethics stuff in his case, because you never tell the people below you in the organization what's going on negative in your life, because that can spread.
Sure.
And part of his repair was to give out some more material from the Church of Scientology, which was Psychiatry Industry of Death. So the Church of Scientology has an entire display that's like walking through a reenactment of the atrocities done in the medical experiments in the Holocaust to scare you away from psychiatry. That talks about how electroshock does this. So it's one of those things that right before I'm getting ready to go back in the world, I get this dose of there's really nothing to help you. Like going to counseling is not going to work. And at this point, I still haven't talked about drugs. Like I'm 4.5, 5 years in this, and other than just very briefly, and we weren't supposed to be talking about drugs, I still hadn't dealt with that, and I was getting ready to go back into this place where it was.
And being hit with the just so you know, when you get out here, you still need to depend on us.
Exactly. And so it's one of those things that I was like, I'm going to go be a nanny for a year, and I'm going to go back to school, and I'm going to repair my third dynamic because I had never finished a degree. So I was going to work on my first dynamic, work on my third dynamic, my body, my mind, and work on completing my obligation to the group and repairing that stuff. So I don't want to say they bought it because all those things were true and I believe them, but I also was like, I can get out. And I can get out in a way that doesn't cut all the ties, because there's a philosophy within the org is that you never close the door. You always leave it a little bit open. So if somebody reaches back, we can get them back. And I kind of felt that the other way, that when I left, if somebody needed help dealing with us on the other side, I don't want to close the door where they can't talk to me.
Sure.
And so that's one of the reasons that I haven't talked out until now, that and the fact that there are really good people that I know honestly were trying to save my life. Just really fucked up thinking about how to do it, at least for my journey. It was not healthy. For all I know, there may be people it works for, but I honestly think it's living in a bubble. And sometimes that works for people, and sometimes that causes more harm. But I ended up coming back. I was a nanny for a year, taught her how to walk, taught her how to sign, did some of that stuff. And then I went back to school. And I'm in my first class. And of course, I've learned all these study skills. Now, needless to say, I'm not doing clay demos in the middle of class, but I'm definitely more studious than I ever was. I'm able to sit, I'm able to focus. Now, I'd failed out of the second college after the hurricane that had destroyed the house. I don't know whether that's second. That's probably third or fourth college at that point in my life. But so I had a 1.7 GPA going back to school. So I started out at community college. And one day I get asked to stay after school, after class. And I thought I was in trouble. My anxiety kicked in. I'm paranoid. And the professor invited me, asked if I wanted to be part of the Honor Society. And I laughed in his face. I'm like, have you seen my transcript? No clue. And he's like, I've seen all I need to see. And so I joined the honors program.
What was it that he saw?
I think somebody that was thirsty for knowledge. That this was the first time I was allowed to say anything. And I wasn't going to get sent away to re-education camp. I was allowed to have thoughts. And it took me a while to speak up and have those things. But I really wanted to understand what was happening, because I was repairing a promise I had let myself down on. I was repairing, and I knew I could do well in school, and I knew I could focus that toward a career. And so I tried really hard, but I also didn't say things unless they were significant, and I was there to learn. And I don't think he was used to that in his general education classes. And so
he saw your potential. He didn't see where you were at. He saw your potential.
Yeah, and he took a big gamble on me, which ended up working out to my advantage. But I ended up figuring out mathematically that in 2 years I could graduate with 2 more degrees and a 3.0 GPA if I could finish 107 hours and get all A's. I had 2 classes I could get B's in mathematically, which I don't know if anybody understands how many hours that is a semester, but that's a lot. And then in 2013, my dad had a heart attack. And then a week later, I went to go get an eye exam, and they saw a mass through my eye on my optic nerve. And it turned out I had what was called pseudotumor cerebri. Now, my entire family is pretty much up at the hospital dealing with my dad and his heart. Like, we barely got him back that time. But I have what basically takes on the shape of a brain tumor. It's just fluid. And they have to start doing spinal taps to drain stuff. Now, one of the things is if they do a spinal tap and they drain it and the hole doesn't seal, your spinal fluid starts leaking into your soft tissue. And it feels like acid is eating the inside. You can't sit up. You can't look at things. So I'm in the middle of a 21 semester hour honors thing, and I can't sit up without puking and vomiting, and nobody is there. And I'm going to be honest, like I text a friend, the only friend I knew to call that was in town. And they were a teacher and they were working a football game, and they said they couldn't come. And I didn't want to call an ambulance because I had already cost my parents $30,000 plus all the money I'd done before. And the next day, I suffered through that night, and the next day I drove about 10 feet, and then I would get out and puke. I'd drive about 10 feet, I'd get out and puke. I'd drive about 10 feet. It was very unsafe. It was very not. And then they end up having to go in with a camera in my spine and patching all the holes with blood where it was leaking soft tissue. So I felt very alone. But I also knew that my dad was probably holding on to life because we weren't together. It killed him not to be able to be there for me. Because I know in a heartbeat that he would have gotten up and pulled out his IVs and walked to me if he could have. So he called me and he goes, if we both survive this, I want to sing for the Christmas concert at church. And so I have a way to make up damage that I've done to my dad. Now, he could barely stand, and Mom needed a break. And so I started going to church choir with him every Wednesday night, which wasn't really my scene, but it was his family and his escape. And we sang together that year. And then he started to lose his memory and get dementia. Now, at this point, I had told myself when I went away to rehab that I wasn't going to date anybody for a very long time. And then when Dad started to lose his memory, I didn't want to date anybody because I didn't want to break his heart over and over again with him having to come to terms with the fact he had forgotten this piece. And in my head, I was afraid that he would judge me for being gay over and over again, but I know that's not what it was. Like, he would be mad at himself for forgetting something that mattered in my life. I know that now. But I deny myself dating people for 8 years in general. But then there came a point where I quit sleeping again at night because he would start having seizures in the middle of the night and we'd have to revive him. And there came a night when I needed a break, and I felt guilty for needing a break because it was so heavy on me. And I'm like, this is your job now. This is what you do. You're the youngest. You're the one without kids. You're the one without family. You created damage in this family for so long. Your job now, this is where your service is needed. Then somebody came back in my life. And we had somebody that I'd known for 20 years ago came back into my life. And we had a decent length relationship that was during the time that my dad passed away. But I got called on a lot of shit. I got called on codependent tendencies. I got called on not understanding boundaries. At the same time, I was coming to terms with my atheism. And at this point, I was out as gender fluid and I was using NICS and I was coming to terms with that. But this person lives very openly and boldly and also introduced me to groups that are kink communities that are very big on consent and talking about, it was the first time I'd seen people being able to do things that go on in their mind in a way that I didn't think was toxic. Now, I don't know that everybody's that way, but there were this core group of people in which I saw that they really cared about consent and respect and appreciating each other. And so my dad is dying. I'm in this relationship. I'm getting called on a lot of stuff. This person knew I wasn't quite ready for a healthy relationship until I dealt with some stuff. Now we're still friends. We're still great friends, actually. But he called me on some shit.
Was that helpful, you feel like?
I think I needed to be called on him. I don't know that his assessment of everything was perfect. And I definitely think that my triggers met with his triggers in a way.
What do you mean by that?
He had a background with a narcissist mom. And I had a background with codependency. And so the things that, like, me needing to know what was going on or stuff like that would trigger.
Okay. All right.
And though we cared about each other, we didn't know how to care about each other.
Right.
And I think that he was worried that it would push him to a space in which some of the characteristics would come out in a way that he wouldn't want to go down a certain path. And I didn't understand. And I just went to counseling at first to be like, I've just got to wrap my mind around not feeling like I'm a piece of shit all the time. Because there were definitely times, and I was coming to terms with the fact of, you know what, I'm not sure what I am anymore. And so I started looking for a therapist. And of course, with the psychiatry stuff and with everything else, talk about research.
Yeah.
Research, heavy research. And I had to, for me, I found one that was LGBT friendly and started with that therapist.
And so, I mean, at this point, had you just gotten over that programming enough to know that those messages that you were told weren't true?
A lot of them I knew weren't true. However, every day, well, not every day, very frequently, there will be a moment when I'll have a thought and then I'll be like, wait a minute. Is that my thought or is that something that I've been programmed to believe?
Gotcha.
And that comes from Christianity. That comes from everything. It comes from country songs about love.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know. Like the older I get, the more I realize I don't know shit. You know? So it's one of those things that, like, I would say that I knew enough to know that I have to look at my decisions and my actions way more in detail than I was.
And so you were able to get past that block enough to know that, like, okay, I can reach out to somebody, but there was still that hesitation.
There's definitely a hesitation.
Yeah.
And so I'd read about the rapid eye movement stuff, and I was like, you know, I've tried weirder things. You know, like at this point, as long as the person is not going to tell me I'm going to hell and not going to try and condition me to be a certain thing.
Right. I make you build clay models. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and even if they had made me build clay models, I'd probably been okay with that. But I started going to my therapist. It was probably about a month and a half after Dad died. I started going to therapy and I got my first tattoo.
Tell me about the significance of that.
There's one of the things that I always need to remember is to think. So I put that. Write is always been my outlet. I've written music. I've written a couple of things in some books back in my Christian days. It'd be kind of scary to read now. But create is the ultimate effort in Scientology and the fact of creating and manifesting things. But I wanted to reclaim that word and the fact that I still had power to bring things into being. And so I put it right where I could read it. 3 words, 3 periods. As a reminder. And so that was my first one. And later on, the relationship ended. And I kind of spun out of control for a while trying to figure out, did I start going to counseling because of the relationship or did I start going for me? And I don't know that I ever really know the answer to that one. But I kept going. And I started on my back piece. And all of a sudden, I could look in a mirror and see something that was me, something that I had designed the art for, something that I had designed the quote for. And then what I would do is I'd come up with the concept, and then I'd have somebody that I've known since high school draw up the design with a little bit of his artistic flair. And I started to face the fact of, you know, I'm tired of shaving. I'm tired of getting up every day and shaving. And then I also looked at the history of breast cancer in my family. And I was like, I want to proactively get my breast removed. And finally, when I came to a place where, even as I was identifying as gender fluid and going by mix, once I had gotten over those visible things that I was willing to do for my body to make it my body again, then I wasn't scared to say the fact that I'm a man. And I had to confront those two things separately. And I'm, as soon as I started to have those thoughts, I was at my house and I was kind of feeling proud. I hadn't come out, I hadn't said it to anybody. But when I was student teaching, I had created an alternate account on Facebook that couldn't be searched by a basic search because I live in a small town, Tennessee, and I am a trans person that's also pansexual, former crackhead, homeless Scientologist. So, number of reasons why I wouldn't want
whole lot going on there.
Whole lot of how many tokens can I be? And I used a masculine name, and I didn't post on there for a while, but then I started to post on there, and I started to develop that side of it. And some different people got to know me on that. And then I was in my yard this summer. And I'm walking to get the mail, and all of a sudden I see these papers that had been littered in our yard. And I go over to pick them up. They're bags of rocks with papers. And they were recruiting letters and letters from the Ku Klux Klan. And so I'm kind of frozen in the front of my yard, like looking across the street where one of my former students is that's a young lady of color. And I'm looking around to see if they're in any other yard. And at this moment, the weirdest thing that's ever happened with my passable privilege happened. I mean, I've had people yell at me in bathrooms for being in the wrong place. I've had entire cheerleading organizations hide in stalls. I've been through some crud in some bathrooms, not violent, but enough to make me, not want to go in one. But I'm standing in the front yard and I'm like, I don't know if they're trying to recruit me or target me. Wow. And I'm sitting, and I froze, and I contact the cops, which I know won't do anything, and I was like, maybe you can watch for people doing this so you can stop the littering, because I knew that there was no way to really track it. And they go, there's nothing we can do because it's not trespassing if they throw it. So they didn't even deal with the litter. And I got no help from the cops, which didn't surprise me. I know some decent people that are cops, but I also know that when I was using drugs, they were just as likely to use me as a tool to get the next guy as the people that were working at. I mean, I was a tool to them just like I was to the guys that came before, and that's the way I'd always felt. There was nothing safe about it for me. And so I contacted them out, and then I reached out to the Southern Law Poverty Center and reported what had happened. And all of a sudden, I get reached out to by the Tennessee Anti-Racist Network that I've been following for a while and asked if I would come speak. AmRen, American Renaissance, was coming to one of the Tennessee state parks. And this is where a lot of the money comes for white supremacy. And one of the people that reached out to me had been very involved in the Women's March, and I had been doing some stuff like that. They had really tried to get me involved in leadership, but even as non-binary, how I was identifying at the time, I didn't feel like that space was for me. Like, I will be an ally, but me being in leadership, I knew that's not where I belonged. Like, I'm willing to help, but I feel like that's taking a voice from women. And so I'm like, I'll help with other things, but I don't, like, you've got too many powerful women for me to be that voice. But they reached out to me to come speak. And what I did is I took the rocks in each of the bag and went. And as the park rangers were denying women of color the right to go and eat at the counter, the public counter that was in our permit to go over to eat in because there were white supremacists in there, I started to give my talk. At the same time, an Antifa guy was getting punched and then punched somebody back, so the cops were dealing with that. And I'm looking at this group of people, and some of them are Christian, and some of them are different things. And Dr. Marissa Richmond, that is a professor at MTSU, gets up to talk. And she's with the Tennessee Transgender Coalition. And there's two ladies with her, and they hold up the flag, the trans pride flag. And she goes, at this moment, I want to invite anybody who identifies as trans or non-binary to come and stand with us if you want to. And this was my coming out. And so I walked up and stood between these two ladies and held this flag. And if you look at the pictures, it's the goofiest picture because I'm grinning in the middle of all this horror. I'm standing there in front of people that made me feel safe. And there was only one other time I felt that, and it was when I had gone to ReasonCon. And I was scared to death to go to North Carolina. But this was my first atheist event without the relationship, on my own. Me stepping out on my own to go do it. And I had been scared to go to North Carolina, and I'd been scared to go to an event. And I walked in, and I saw you, and I saw some of the other trans people there. And mind you, I had only listened to one podcast before this, and I never even knew that the atheist community had a big podcast network. I didn't know what they were, which is funny. So I sat there and watched as you proposed to Celeste. And it was the first time that I wasn't scared to be in a space. And I was still too scared to come and say congratulations to you guys. But it mattered. And it's what gave me the courage to stand up that day with those women. And so I took the rocks from my bag that had been thrown in the yard, and I gave them to the people that had come from all over, of different colors, of different backgrounds. And I go, they wanted these rocks to break us up. They wanted me to feel shame for standing beside you. So I want you to take it and either pass it on to me, somebody else, or return it to a place of peace. But I want these rocks to bring us together, because that's how they don't win. And so, that day ended, and we moved on. And then this year started, and the first letter I ever wrote you, I was still using mix, and I was still saying gender fluid. And then there was a point in which the white supremacists announced they were coming to Shelbyville. And I was enraged that they had come to my home property, that they had come to that, and they felt the audacity that they were going to be able, and it was right after Charlottesville. And so I started to grow out my beard for the first time in my life. And I was like, I'm going to be the white man on the other side. I'm going to be on camera. My students are going to see it, and they're going to see me standing with the group of people where I think all white men should stand. And I'm going to own that. And it was the first time that me and my former partner were in the same space, but we were there for our own reasons, and we'd come on our own, and we were a diff group, and I wasn't dependent on him being there. And I talked to my therapist, and 2 weeks ago I started testosterone. Today I took my second shot, but 2 weeks ago, probably about 2 days before that, I came out at work, and I spoke before that to the gender studies class in a small rural town in Tennessee. And we've started an online secret group for people to reach out to. We've got some parents that are dealing with their kids coming out as trans, and they reach out and go, I don't know what to do. We help them put together care packages and stuff like that. And we're in the process of starting a PFLAG in the area, which is the first PFLAG in the area. Which may not seem like a lot, but in a small place like this, it's the closest thing to community that I've known. And so that's where I'm at.
Rob, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story, my friend. It is an honor and pleasure to know you, and I love you to pieces. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. If you think what we do here is important, please share this around to your friends. Search the Gaytheist Manifesto on Facebook and Twitter to find us there. I'm at Gaytheist Callie on Twitter. You can email us at podcast@theGaytheistManifesto.com. We're a part of the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative. We're a group of trans podcasting badasses working to bring more trans voices into podcasting and other content creation. Search the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative on Facebook for more info. If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/thegaytheist manifesto and make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. If that's not on the cards, you can give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and share us around to your friends. It all helps and it all makes a difference. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares or no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gay Theist Manifesto.